Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Alotta. I'm the Vice President of Global Programs at Mozilla, and I'm going to be your host for today's panel. We have a vital discussion planned for today as part of MozFest Dialogues and Debates. We're going to unpack an issue that's underpinning so many of the problems online and offline today, the relationship between AI and power. The AI in our lives reinforces historical power imbalances across gender, across race, across class. There are so many examples to list, but here are a few. Hiring algorithms prioritize men over women and non-binary candidates. Facial recognition systems misidentify Black faces, and I would argue also that Zoom backgrounds don't allow for Black folks to use a Zoom background without becoming part of the background, as we just discovered 30 seconds ago. And a year into the pandemic, we could have gotten that right by now. Facial recognition systems and voice assistants like Alexa and Siri struggle to understand the voices of so many diasporas. AI-powered digital ads can prey on or exclude those who have the least. We're going to unpack all of this today, but we're also going to ask, is it possible to mainstream AI systems which are actually just? Today, I am joined by a number of fantastic colleagues. I'm really honored to be on screen with y'all. Dr. Cierra Roberts is an associate professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, in the Department of Information Studies, where she serves as the co-director of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. Welcome. Cierra Robson, the associate director of the IDB Wells Just Data Lab at Princeton University, where she guides research teams in partnership with community organizations to explore how data can be retooled for racial justice. Welcome, Cierra. Julie Owono is a lawyer and the executive director of Paris-based digital rights organization Internet Sans Frontières. I made it Spanish, I'm sorry. Julie's, I could have practiced that. Let's go practice your French in the bathroom. Julie's work focuses on building bridges and creating channels of collaboration between various actors of the digital space to foster the development of an internet that benefits everyone all over the world. Welcome, Julie. And Nighat is the executive director of the Digital Rights Foundation. Nighat is one of the pioneer women's rights activists in Pakistan and has played a pivotal role in defining the cyberspace narrative in the country. Welcome. And one last thing, we're taking questions for this panel in real time, so you can tweet them at Mozilla with the hashtag dialogues and debates spelled out. So this is a conversation. I'm gonna field a question to each one of our panelists, but to the other panelists, after our initial panelist takes a stab at an answer, please feel free to chime in. And I'll move us along by taking facilitator privilege, but I don't want to squash any conversation. So please do feel free to engage one another. So let's start with some context. This panel is entitled AI and Power. Right now, who wields power in the realm of AI and who doesn't? Nighat, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me and having a voice from a place where we usually don't have these conversations. So I'm glad that someone from Pakistan is actually talking about AI and power. And you asked a question, who actually has the power? The one group that doesn't yield any power in AI is the end user and consumer, the average internet user and netizen. It's the user's data that is collected and sold, and except for the global north and a few developing countries, most users do not know what their digital rights are. And I'm speaking from the perspective and the context of Pakistan. And rarely are they enshrined and protected in our laws or constitution. So this collected data is fed into that databases that then targets the users through AI. Internet giants, governments, and social media companies become more and more powerful, and the average user is left with fewer and fewer avenues and way to exert their power. Minus the end user, everyone in the digital ecosystem gains power through AI. The only difference is that each stakeholder yields different amounts of power and control. Social media companies and tech giants have spun a deeply interconnected web of data sharing that gives them immense power over the internet and internet users. And now, with governments entering this equation, this power and data is also being shared with them. So, in usual circumstances, governments are already powerful entities. However, when we add this AI into this equation, their power increases exponentially. uh, Data and online behavior gives the government the ability to identify how to target individuals and how to control narratives online. And if we go a little further in this debate of power, I think it's very important for us to examine the bias in AI and how these biases mainly stem from humans' inherent biases. The models and systems we create and train are a reflection of ourselves, and extremely important for us to see who is designing and training AI and which part of the world they are designing AI, be it a tech giant, social media company, or within a government.
Thank you, Nighat. Yeah, that anybody else want to respond? I think one thing that I want to offer up into the when we're talking about power and we're talking about bias, and then also what it means for just this group of folks to be having the opportunity for us all to speak together is oftentimes if we're the voices who have to combat the bias, what is it actually, where's the original thought and where that we actually don't have the room or the space to bring forward in that, right? So if the onus is on the folks who are actually bearing the brunt of that bias to showcase that bias, where's the invention and the incentive for that to actually come forward? And so we're losing out twice, and that's the impact of that bias on everyone. And we know that the power imbalance can't be fixed simply by tweaking code or enacting a single new law, right? Power inequalities are baked into the systems and the data that powers them. But I'm curious about how deep the problem goes. Cierra, do you think you can shine some light on it, the subject for us?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I'm so excited to be here with you all. To get to the question, one of the things that we have to think about is how even those technologies that are not meant to reinforce power inequalities can still end up doing so. So the tools that are fundamentally built to reduce harm can often reinforce it. And one good example of this is pretrial risk assessment tools. So algorithms judges use to determine a defendant's risk of reoffense before a sentencing hearing. In many states, this was heralded as a solution to cash bail, which many people know has lots of issues and often reinforces like income inequality, wealth inequality. But they don't understand the ways in which these algorithms can also reinforce all sorts of different things. So pretrial risk assessments were proposed as this technological solution, but those who were deemed most risky would be put in prison until their hearing, and everyone else would be allowed to await their trial. But in the first iteration, many of these tools included race as predictive variables. Many of them included zip codes. Many of them included things like, do you own a cell phone, or do you pay rent, in their variables that they use to predict whether or not someone would be deemed risky. And people quickly realized that this produced discriminatory results. So these categories were then excluded, but then new categories came up as proxies for things like race. And so what does all of this mean? In short, it means that tweaking code doesn't rid systems of bias or power. Instead, we have to really think about what the tools are meant to do at their inception. And technological tools will not be able to solve social problems on their own. And we really should stop asking them to do so and instead build tools from the ground up that are supposed to help the world in the ways that we want them to.
I want all of the participate in the conversation, to lean into being in conversation with one another. Yeah.
I just wanted to double down on what Cierra just said. We tend to focus a lot of the conversation recently around AI and its biases on technical solutions, but we actually forget what Cierra and what Nighat also said previously, is that the digital world is just a mirror of whatever already exists offline. So it's we shouldn't, stop ourselves from having those very serious conversations too on how racist our societies are, on how sexist they are. Happy International Women's Day. On how transphobic they are, and all the very negative things that we see reproduced online. So I just wanted to chime in and say that in this machine, in this era in which a machine is going to basically make decisions and is making decisions on human interaction and human produced content, it's really time for us to go beyond the machine and bring back the human within this conversation. It's absolutely important.
Sarah, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent segue, and I'd love to just pick that one up because, essentially, I think it's what I'm charged with speaking a bit about on today's panel, and that is to actually, on some levels, fundamentally ask the question, what do we mean when we say AI anyway, right? So there are all these received notions right now within not only within just like the zeitgeist, within our media sphere, in conversation with each other as advocates and oftentimes critics, but that question of what is AI, what constitutes AI, is in fact a standing problem space within computer science. Okay, both in the theoretical side of computer science and in its application. And so this dilemma about what constitutes artificial intelligence was present at the birth of the field, and it was, in some fundamental papers by the key kinds of computer scientists of the day. They actually stated that part of the problem with artificial intelligence precedes artificial intelligence. It's the question of what constitutes intelligence, full stop. What constitutes intelligence within the realm of the human? And then, if that problem, or if that definition is somewhat fuzzy, unclear, contested, then what does it mean, therefore, that this kind of nebulous notion is picked up and by definition abstracted and then put into implementation? This was an issue foreseen by some of the founders of this field, and all the way up till today, we have very important kind of industry facing bodies and thinkers, in the form of, just the one that's on my mind is the O'Reilly Group, kind of still adequately acknowledging, still adequately trying to define what this is. And, again, drawing down on this issue of what AI is, they say not only is it difficult to define, it's actually impossible to do, especially without falling into tautologies and in a kind of like these self-referential intractable circles. So I think it's important, as some of my colleagues have already said, that we Cierra was just saying, we can't critique the AI piece if we don't really understand what the systems are that are in play and what the fundamental social issues are that are feeding into that, whether it's overtly sometimes, but more importantly and more worrisome, in an insidious fashion, because we don't even know how to adequately address these issues and attend to them as a social collective. There are many of us who do work on them, right? But we're in a fight around that, in a fight to constantly prove that some of these social forces are at play and are causing harm. Now that gets picked up and packaged up into AI and pushed out. And I guess one of the greatest concerns there is we take these already very hard to demonstrate systems of power, and we create a huge layer of opacity around them. And then we further automate them and give them incredible power to be reproduced. And so that's where we sit with AI. And the last comment I'll make about my own work and my own intervention in thinking in the space is simply within the realm of commercial content moderation, where we have heard for years from the firms and from others that kind of the way out of the horror of doing this work and its psychological consequence will be deliverance via AI and other kinds of automated content moderation tools. But again, I've just, I hopefully convinced everyone that we're dealing with is a very blunt kind of instrument that is in fact incredibly unintelligent in many cases. It will do exactly what it's programmed to do, which is often going to create more and more and new and different kind of errors. They might be different. They might be errors that humans wouldn't themselves make, in fact. And so, we have a lot of false positives coming into play here. And going back to the claim that humans would then be delivered from content moderation, what I've actually been tracking for some time is the ways in which AI and other kinds of automated content moderation tools actually expand the need for human intervention, because now we need not only we need the creation of the tools, of course, on the input side, but on the output side, we now need more and more humans to vet or even undo errors caused by AI moderation. That's in a best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, the errors aren't undone and all kinds of false positives go forward, or decisions are just simply made that we can't understand or even know are being taken. Thanks.
So I just want to, Cierra, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to echo what Sarah was saying. I really appreciate your emphasis on the definition of what AI actually is. And it just brought to mind that the definition of what is fair is also a contested issue and something that we should think really critically about. I mean, computer scientists have been thinking about the definition of fair for algorithms for quite some time. And the short answer is that there is no answer yet. But also to remember that what is fair is not necessarily just. So it's not totally clear that making facial recognition better at identifying Black faces is a good thing for the world. It's not totally clear that you want police to be able to better identify people in Black neighborhoods. It's not totally clear that you want ICE to be able to better identify undocumented immigrants. All of these things kind of come up in the definition of fairness. And so I think it's really important that we hone in on what we actually mean when we are talking about fairness, what we actually want to prioritize in our conversations about AI and power.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And also this idea that it's not static, right? That it's in the same way that the shifting of power is an ever-evolving possibility. The idea that the idea of the notion of intelligence is not fixed, and that there's a cultural context or multiple cultural contexts around what's getting deemed intelligent, and the outputs and the outcomes are leaning into all of those systemic notions as anything else. I really appreciate that a lot. I mean, the other piece of it that certainly in the context of this conversation, right, is that much of the AI technology is actually tested and made or made in the Western world and beta tested elsewhere. And there are invasive AI systems deployed at refugee camps. Cambridge Analytica meddled in African elections long before the US election, right? And so what can be done? Are there movements pushing back against this behavior?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. And for that, if you allow me, I'm just going to share instead of having a beautiful background today, because Zoom doesn't recognize the features of my face, I'm just going to share. I hope you can see this this answer that I drafted regarding your question, which is what is being done to basically prevent all the bad actors from testing all this, and also the good faith ones are honest on testing to test all these horrible things on users and end users and consumers, like Nighat said earlier, who have absolutely no say into this conversation. And for that, I'd like to borrow a term that I read in a recent publication called Philanthropy and Digital Civil Society Blueprint 2021. It was written by Dr. Lucy Benholz from the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford University. And it's basically, I call it a Bible for all that's related. If you want to know everything about philanthropy and digital civil society this year, this is definitely one place you should go to. And in that Bible, there was this word that was used, global majority. I hate the term, honestly, global South, global North. They absolutely mean nothing. But when we talk about global majority, we clearly understand that a majority of those who live on this earth are actually, guinea pigs. They're just honestly victims of whatever is being decided elsewhere without ever being consulted and ever being part of the conversation. But at the same time, this global majority is also our future. They tell us what's going to happen to us here in the global minority. I say here because I live in the so-called global north, but I'm Cameroonian. And I've seen in my work at Internet Sans Frontières, Internet Without Borders, also in English, we have seen how quick you can understand what's going to happen when you look at what's happening in places where actually nobody usually cares, and specifically the media. I'll give you one example. When we started to talk about trolls following in the aftermath of the 2016 US presidential election, we actually knew that we didn't know these were trolls, but we knew that we had seen those automatically generated publication tweets back in 2010, when we're looking at what was happening in a Western African country called Gabon, in which there were repression following uprising of the population in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And to counter the narrative around what was happening, and to counter the fact that civil society organizations, citizens had found a space on Twitter and on Facebook, Twitter particularly, to tell what was really happening in a media environment that was completely locked for them. The government chose to buy bots, obviously. We started seeing people from India or from Turkey tweeting about what was happening in Gabon while not being there. This was weird, but at the time, honestly, we didn't know that this was a troll or automated propaganda. So why am I saying that global majority and global minority more than ever need to collaborate? It's because we have the knowledge in Western big academic institutions, in Western big human rights organizations. But in the global majority, they have the experience in their flesh, but they cannot name that experience. They cannot name that what they're seeing and what they're being victims of is wrong. We're talking about facial recognition. Recently, reports surfaced that in countries like Uganda, facial recognition is being used to arrest, democratic demonstrators. That's absolutely worrying. We're also you talked about refugees. Of course, refugees. This is a big problem in my country, Cameroon. There's several huge refugee crises at the same time, and we recently learned that the government accepted to sign with I think it was the UNHCR, at least a big UN refugee institution, they accepted to sign basically a program that would allow them to digitally trace all the refugees that come into Cameroon. It might sound appealing, especially for a country like Cameroon that's already struggling with many other issues, and basically doesn't have the money to handle all these new refugees and all these new people. But what are the problems that will come after that when you start tracing the weakest? What are you going to do later on to those, once you have tested, once you have perfected your ability to trace every single moment of the life of an individual? What are you going to do with those who are, for now, living in a more liberal world and in a peaceful world? So this has been the core of my work since working in this space, making sure that we collaborate as much as possible, because there are lots of things that we can tell you, and I'm not just Africans, Asians, Latin Americans, but also trans communities, LGBT communities in general. We can tell you things, but we need to collaborate with academics and with big institutions, not in an extractive way. And I'm insisting on that, but really collaborate, respecting, the expertise of each other. It's not because it's an experience that it's worth less. That's a false assumption that is plaguing the industry. But collaborate on an equal level, because what I'm bringing to the table is absolutely necessary for you to make the point with your theoretical, frame. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you today, and I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks for you.
Thank you. Sarah, I saw your hand raised, and I want to also prompt the other folks in the conversation. I think that presumption of who has what to say, and even the terminology around majority and minority, Cierra, that reminds me too about the distinction between fair and just. And then Nighat, the point you were making originally in terms of who's articulating their power and who has agency under the current paradigms. I mean, I think that we could kind of flip the script here and break the conversation open a little bit around all of that. So Sarah, you had your hand open, but no, I'm going to call on the rest of you right afterwards.
Yeah, I'm going to toss the mic to my peers in just 1 second. I just have such like a short-term memory problem that I want to just raise up +1. I get on these panels and I freak out with excitement because what people are saying is so on point and powerful. And so, Julie, I think what you just said about terminology, number one, and about the problematic relationship historically and in this contemporary moment with academia and its relationship to industry and its extractive relationship on communities is also key here to kind of where we might break in and do repair work and do new kinds of paradigm shifting to change exactly what you were talking about. So first of all, I just wanted to share out on the terminology piece that I once read within another piece by a civil society advocate from India, who was speaking about, he refused to use those kinds of received terms as well. And he was talking about the overdeveloped world. And I've always loved that. And so I kind of try to use that when I can. And I also think about what we're actually talking about is resources and economic resources primarily. And so I think about it in terms of the economic overly resourced world, like jumping off on that point, versus the inappropriately economically under-resourced parts of the world. So I just throwing that out there as a possibility and as something that I think about in terms of your the comments about who gets to create laboratories on other people and treat other places and peoples as guinea pigs. This predates all of this computational business. I always think about, from my American context, the interference of the American government in South America and in places like Chile and Argentina and Brazil and all of these countries that were meddled with to murderous ends. And this is a tradition in place, predating AI, but certainly in place around picking places in the world and then going and doing stuff upon them that will then come home to roost in the American context. And then the last thing I wanted to say before I silence myself is the piece about what you said so accurately about who actually has special insight into these problems. Who is most harmed are the people who have the solutions, or at least the knowledge to put it into the pipeline to talk about interventions. And it was with that in mind that my colleague and collaborator and dear friend, Dr. Safiya Noble, and I came up with the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry, where we put forth and put forward and put first these kinds of voices with all of the expertise they have, because we ourselves, Safiya as a Black woman, myself as a gay woman, we understand what it's like to have the knowledge and to frankly be the canaries in the coal mine. We're always trying to bang on the window and tell everyone. And so that's what we're trying to actually create a beacon for, and to create a large enough critical mass of people to do some of that within academia specifically.
I just want to acknowledge that some of our internet is more robust than others. So Nighat is going to go on audio. Nighat, are you able to hear us pretty well now?
Yes, I can. I just wanted to add a little bit into this conversation. I mean, I know we are talking about AI and power, and I think it's very important for us to focus on power, than who gets to design or train AI. And I think I have said a little bit about this, but building on what Julie said, it's whose knowledge is it anyway, right? I mean, the people who are in our context have so much knowledge, but there is an immense inequality of distribution of that knowledge. We are mostly used as, although we have all the knowledge, and then that knowledge sort of transfers or travels to the Western world, and then that's where we see the bias. That's where the design, the design of product takes place. And instead of distribution or equal distribution of resources, we see that the inequalities between the global North and global South organizations working on digital rights or working on tech and human rights, those inequalities become wider and wider every day. So and it's a lot of labor. It's a free labor. Like sitting on panels and sharing your knowledge is a free labor. And I think it's now time, when we are seeing these conversations happening in the Western world around content moderation, how we are sharing. Absolutely have no idea what are the decisions being taken around them, while people who are sitting in these big tech giants and social media companies, or like running governments. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there is a lot of labor happening in global South, but there is a very that labor and distribution of.
Nighat, your audio cut out right at the end there, but I'm gonna try to recap and then let us know if that I've come close. But just in terms of the wealth of information that is extracted, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, that is extracted like a resource, as resources have long been extracted from the location of that knowledge, and then there's a huge gap between then and a dearth of information of how that information even parlays into invention, if you will, and I'm making air quotes, and how it's being used. And so it's happening on two levels. There's the original extraction of knowledge, and then there's the ways that the knowledge is being put to use that's not even being made clear. Is that correct on the point that you were trying to make right there at the end?
Absolutely correct. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Cierra, do you want to hop in there?
Sure. I was just adding on to Sarah. I mean, at the Just Data Lab, we do exactly the same thing. And the way that we are trying to do that is literally to put in the hands of community organizations research resources. And so we assign teams of undergrad researchers with the Princeton pedigree to these community organizations who say, you know, we really would love to know this, or we really want to advocate for this. And the students work on behalf of the organization in partnership with the organizations. The organizations drive all of the theorizing, drive the data collection, drive everything. And I think it's just a really powerful way to make sure that the voices who need to be included are not only at the table, but are at the head of the table. They're controlling the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that, the kinds of opportunities that you're each actually creating, and what you're excited about, and what, like, I really don't want it to be that when we're having conversations of power and we have a panel of women, queer people of color, that we're only talking about the power that we're disallowed, or and like, I know everybody here is doing incredible work and putting forward. Cierra, you just gave us a little window into that as well. What are you excited about? How do you see that shifting? You know, when we're talking about the analog disparities of power are often upended when we come to collective purpose. So I'm curious about examples of that kind of collectivity, or anything that's thrilling you in this moment. If we could go around, and I know I didn't give you warning. I was going to ask you that, but if we can be thoughtful about that, of something that you're excited about, and what you see as potentially power shifting in the most micro or macro way. I'd love for that to be in the room and as part of the conversation. I'm going to go around. So Sarah, you're the first square in my family feud.
Yeah, I feel like Brady Bunch a lot of times too with this. Okay, and we're all like arranged differently, but anyway. Okay, so yeah, great question. I appreciate the context too, right? Because this isn't all about those of us on the panel and those who we represent just ceding power. We're not doing that. You know, if we ever did it, we're not doing it anymore, and we're actually thinking through new ways of doing, and new ways of creating, as Cierra was just, you know, articulating. And so from my own perspective, and from speaking for our center at UCLA, one of the things that Safia Noble and I are working on right now actively is thinking about you know, some of the projects we've had in mind for a decade, which is pushing back, pushing open that public space and the public sphere that has been inappropriately colonized. And I do use that word very very intentionally, by tech. Tech having kind of taken up these notions that we have about so many of these information institutions that have sat in squarely in kind of the public good space, and then colonized their words, their identities. We have Susan Wojcicki from YouTube going around the world telling the whole world YouTube is a library. If you want to see me go apoplectic, let me hear her say that one more time. I lose it every time. It's not without harm that she does that. Libraries don't collect data and monetize it on their users. Libraries don't promote and disseminate disinformation and misinformation material without any sense of responsibility. They don't use algorithms to serve up garbage to just keep people engaged. That is not a library. So YouTube is not a library, but libraries actually have so much to offer, and our ways of knowing. Libraries, a flawed institution as well, with a difficult history. But how could we reimagine some of the principles and values that come from libraries and librarianship to actually say, not only is YouTube not a library, but this is what a library looks like when it is in the internet space and in practice for the public good and for the benefit of the public. So that's just like the slightest preview of and a very half-baked explanation of what we're coming up with. But what I'm saying is we're actually going to stop ceding those spaces and those imaginaries actually to tech, and we're going to reintroduce very directly and with great purpose some of these identifiable information curatorial roles to help users make sense when the sense making has been deliberately removed from them for the purposes of profit. So that's kind of where we are, in essence, bringing the human back and foregrounding the human in this notion of artificial intelligence. Like, whoever said that was better, we used to think sweet and low was better too. You know what I mean? It's not. It causes cancer. It's not good. So we're just thinking that way right now. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Julie, what about you? What are you excited about? Where do you see some potential, and what would make you really happy to see some momentum behind?
I'm honestly very excited about a lot of things right now when it comes to this conversation. The first thing, of course, is that my very dear colleague, Nighat, she'll speak for herself, and myself are both part of a new organization, powerful organization, which is making decisions on Facebook and Instagram content moderation, including the automated ones. And I'm talking here about the oversight board, which was created almost a year ago now. And for me, this is exciting because it's honestly the first time in this industry that we're recognizing that the expertise and knowledge from people who we thought before, did not matter. Let's talk very frankly. I mean, I'm a Black woman, so how many chances I would have been here having this conversation 10 or 15 years ago would have been very difficult. So I measure, and we talk about that with Nighat often. We measure, what we've been able to do, but that's not the end of it all. We are here, and I'm here particularly with the purpose of making sure that whenever we will have conversations about content moderation, but others in general, we will not look at people like me or people elsewhere outside of the US and outside of Europe, outside of Canada as just consumers or users who we think about in the afterthought. It's the priority. It should be the principle. And the other thing I'm excited about, which is closely linked to the one I just mentioned, is that I'm doing a research right now at the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford University, and also as an affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard. What I'm working, I'm not even studying. We've developed at Internet Sans Frontières a methodology to make sure that in the automated moderation systems that platforms are rolling out as the solution to the content problems, well, we want to make sure to get the human back into the loop. And by human, I talk here about the very specific context that is missing from most of the automated content moderation systems. And by doing that, to bring those contexts, to bring this very local knowledge, we rely and we work with, and we also, collaborate, as I was saying, we collaborate with organizations in the countries where we work in. And once we work with them, we have a better understanding of what hate actually looks like in those countries, what disinformation actually looks like. When you work only with people located in Global North, you're going to feed databases that are filled with errors and honestly bullshit most of the times, and that are even going to silence those who are actually using those platforms to bring a critical debate, a critical voice that we don't like necessarily, but that is necessary for many democracies in the world to flourish. And so that's the other part I'm excited about, making sure that whenever we talk about those products, we will adopt basically the same strategy as the bad actors. Why not test the good things, by collaborating with civil society organizations in those countries and global majority? I'm trying to educate myself too. It's very difficult. And yes, that's the future. I'm borrowing, a word here from Catherine Maher, who said that to make her work so positive, heading the Wikimedia Foundation, she looked at the future, and the future was Africa, Asia, Latin America. Thanks.
So I think that's so important, because so many times the conversation is, how do we have a seat at the table, and not how do we make a new table, or whoever said we wanted a table in the first place, right? Like it's really, really, really important to think about how we build the future that we're intent upon living in. Cierra, what about you? What are you excited about? What feels positive to you?
I'm also so excited about so many things. And I told you all about the Just Data Lab, and I'm so excited about the work that's going on there. But in my own research, I'm working on a project that explores how minority political candidates in the US experience mis and disinformation online. And unsurprisingly, it often borders on harassment. One easy example is Obama's anti-birther rumor that accused him of not being born in the United States, but that specifically hinged on his racial and ethnic identity. But anyway, all of that is to say that I'm really excited about a lot of the new tools that are springing up, created by women, created by people of color, created by other marginalized folks, to kind of solve these problems. And I really appreciate what Julie and Sarah were talking about bringing the human back in. And one instrumental part of being human is the communities that we're a part of. So one of my favorite examples is Amy Zhang's Squad Box, which is a kind of crowdsourced way for your friends and family to filter out negativity and harassment online. And it really centers community involvement, care. And I love that these things are being infused into what we often deemed really impersonal, kind of objective, whatever that means, systems and tools. So I love that that's kind of being infused, and I think that's the best way to move forward.
Thank you. Nighat, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, as Julie already said, that the experience that we both are having, I think I'm very excited, and also, it's unusual space for women like me, a woman of color, where you have like a powerful space where you have all the power to take decisions, and it's unusual for us because usually we don't have that kind of space. And I feel that it's so important to normalize these spaces for women of color who have immense knowledge around human rights and technology and digital rights. And we have so many women of color. And even if they are part of different boards or advisory councils, how much voice they have. And I think we really need to see that, like how we can give them that voice. And at the micro level, I'm very excited around the work that we are doing in Pakistan. I'm very excited to see a lot of women feminists taking lead around the discourse of digital rights and the kind of feminist internet we are making here. Also, looking into the issues that no one has ever looked into, and then holding tech giants accountable or powerful actors accountable within the country, while living in a country where in the patriarchal society talking to a powerful state is very difficult. I'm very excited for that future, especially on this International Women's Day. I'm excited to see the feminist internet, not just in Pakistan, but across the world.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think is really important, and I'm going to tie it to one of the questions we got asked on Twitter, is that we're not talking about only engaging something theoretically, right? Like that these ideas of a feminist internet, of a community-led internet, of majority, a global majority, right, that are actually about being able to build and having the capacity to build autonomy and autonomous spaces that are untethered from these systems of inequality, and that they were designed to be unjust. I mean, I think that that's the piece, is that it's not that it's just broken. It's actually working in the ways that things were intended. And insofar as we hold different intentions, then we have to build for those intentions. And I think that that's also a way that that's an opportunity I'm actually excited about. So is that while certainly we see when we build unintentionally or on purpose, unjustly, what we get, but that we actually do have the opportunity to build really specifically in new ways, and I'm excited about that. I think there are a lot of incredible conversations and things being built around data sovereignty, around community access, around looking at also who's holding what data and for whom. There's a lot there that I feel really excited to unpack. I told us that I'd point us also to the rest of MozFest. So I'm also excited the fact that a lot of what was discussed here is getting teased out much more across so many different panels and conversations and workshops and in spatial chat around MozFest. So I really urge folks to participate in those conversations if anything that got uplifted here feels particularly germane. One of the questions we got asked on Twitter, and I think that this is, I'm gonna bring them together. I'm gonna tell you two questions, and then anybody who wants to take it, because I think we've touched on this. In what ways can we bring an intersectional, anti-oppression, anti-caste lens into discussions and decisions about power inequalities in tech? Another question that came up is around indigenous wisdom. So community and indigenous wisdom, how do we bring that into tech, particularly in response to gendered harassment, racial profiling, or misinformation? And so and then the third question on Twitter was, how do we step out of the predetermined identities some of us have been given? So how do we actually upend or avoid the algorithm versions of ourselves that we've been ascribed? So they're small, easy questions. But if any of them speaks to you, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Julie, is that, yeah?
Yes, thank you. I will, take the most difficult one, which is related to how to make sure we're, bringing in anti-patriarchy and anti-oppression views and knowledge, and also indigenous knowledge. I would like to flag one very important procedure that exists out there. So the Oversight Board, which I mentioned, is a new organization which makes decision on content decision made by Facebook and Instagram on their platforms. And one of the ways, we really want to foster interaction with the public. I know the public is potentially 2 billion people, so it's not, possible virtually, but we do have a channel of communication, which is through the public comment that we open for each case that we receive. For instance, we had a public comment period that was 10 days, I think, for the Trump suspension account case. We received a lot of comments, and many of them from northern institutions, and particularly in the United States. We had another case that's related to blackface on Facebook, are we allowed to, and particularly on Zwarte Piet, who is a traditional Christmas character in the Netherlands, and who has been criticized for alleged racism and blackfacing. And blackface has been, recently Facebook rolled out a new policy saying blackface is not allowed anymore on its platforms. So we invited public comments on that as well. I mean, in general, in all the cases that we have, public comments are really a great opportunity for us to have, access to another point of view that's not from the user, that's not from Facebook or Instagram, but that's, from organization working on this issue. And it's very helpful. I'll give you one example in a case related to Azerbaijan and Armenia. There was a publication published during a conflict that happened in the Nagorno-Karabakh region earlier last year. And we received a comment telling us that, well, in a case of conflict, international human rights usually allows or is more permissible with regards to using, very inflammatory words, insults, and all this. I didn't know that personally, and I found it very compelling and helpful. So just to give an example of how we can deconstruct our preconceived ideas too as oversight board members and look at cases differently based on contributions and comments that we received from individuals or institutions.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left. Sarah, please give us your response to any of those questions. Tell us which ones you're answering.
Sure. Just on the blackface issue, in this book, in the English or French edition, whatever is your pleasure, there is a content moderator working at Megatech who raises this issue starting in 2012. And so there's these other points of input that we can bring to the table about who sees problems and who has foresight. And commercial content moderators at firms, whether they are located at the firms or whether they are at geographical and organizational remove as contractors, have incredible insight and knowledge about these things, and yet that knowledge has gone directly to the garbage can in most cases. So I want to acknowledge the work that they do and the kinds of information they also have that has been pretty much not taken up. And who does commercial content moderation? Well, it's some of the very people that we are concerned with in this conversation that we've had. With apologies to Audre Lorde, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. We are in a paradigm where tech defines not only the answers, but the problems. And so what I would urge everyone to do is to push back on that framing. And we will take the power to ask our own questions and answer them appropriately using the expertise and knowledge we have from our lived experience, from our communities, from indigenous ways of knowing, all the places that have historically and continue to be ignored and denied. So I refute being in a space where I respond to the problems that tech creates and then asks us to fix, and then also doesn't take up what we have to say, by the way. So I will say we're going to bring new questions and answers, maybe even not to the table, as you said earlier. Thank you. To another place.
Right on. We're at time, so I want to give Cierra and Nighat a word if you'd like to bring anything into the room.
I just want to plus one everything that was already said.
Right on. Nighat?
Yeah, same here. Agree to everything, whatever has been said.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Cierra, Julie, Nighat, Sarah, for joining us. Thank you all out there for joining us. Remember that power is already ours, and this is about actually stepping up in community, in collaboration, and in purpose to exercise that power. So thanks, everyone, and see you at the rest of MozFest.